Hey y'all, it's Farley with Writer's Edge Podcast, and today I'm moaning the winter blues. So, it's that time of year again, and it happens. The time that the clocks change and we fall back an hour and everybody's systems get messed up and all of a sudden we have no daylight. It also happened that winter showed up today here in the South. Our friends west and north and points elsewhere have already dealt with winter a couple of times already, but here in Arkansas and other places, this was the first day that the weather got really rude, and it's a little rude outside. So let's talk about a few things that happen when the temperatures get rude and the daylight gets short. One of those things that happens to people, it's called seasonal affective disorder, also referred to as SAD. This is a temporary depression that happens due to lack of sunlight. We get vitamin D from the sunlight, just like our horses do, and other processes go on in our body to help us function. And when we have less sunlight, then that becomes a problem. And this SAD can affect people in different ways. Some people are super sensitive to it and they know this and do different things to help themselves. And it can affect people different ways, different years. Some people it can affect real mildly. And sometimes, some years it doesn't affect them as much or at all. And so it really can depend. It really can be the symptoms can be as seasonal as the name itself. Pun intended. However, it should be taken seriously because on the severe spectrum of seasonal affective disorder symptoms or seasonal affective depression, those terms are kind of interchangeable. People can go into a depression and it can cause serious effects. And if you or somebody you know is having that kind of trouble, then that is something to take seriously and talk to a professional about. Talk to your physician, talk to a medical professional who can help you with that. Some ways to combat seasonal affective disorder on any part of the spectrum is to, one, try to get as much natural sunlight as you can. And you're like, okay, Farls, it's not there. Well, what I mean by that is if you are stuck inside at work, make sure if you have access to a window at your office that you have the blinds up during the day. If you're not that lucky to have that access, make sure you change your schedule around to go outside at lunch. Even if you go outside and sit in your car to eat lunch, or go outside and take a walk or whatever, break your routine up to try to get as much sunshine as you can, because as we all know, going to work in the dark and coming home in the dark and then trying to get everything done at your barn in the dark, whether it's working horses under lights or just feeding or whatever, can take a toll on you very, very quickly. There's also this thing called the happy light. The happy light is a artificial sun lamp that it's not harmful to you and your skin, but it has the other spectrum of what sunlight puts off, and using that can really help combat SAD symptoms. people who live in Alaska, in Canada, and very northern places use these lights every year. But you don't have to be in the north for it to affect you. You can be a delicate southern belle and be in the south and have symptoms from seasonal affective disorder. I know I have family members that use the happy light in the winter, and it really helps them. One note of caution, though, if you do end up going down the happy light route or the artificial sun lamp, is to make sure you time that and read the instructions that go along with that very carefully. Because if you don't and you use it at the wrong time of day, you could very much start messing up your sleep patterns. And so it's very important to use that and try to mimic natural sunlight as much as you can. So there's a couple ways to do that. If those tips don't help with seasonal affective disorder, like I said, please reach out to a friend, reach out to a medical professional to get some help, because depression, whether it comes from seasonal affective disorder or other places, is no joke. We all need to share some love and look out for each other, no matter what's going on in our lives. Winter brings on some hard changes, not just a lack of daylight and the cold temperatures, but the cold temperatures can be to blame for this next issue that we need to look out for when it turns cold, and that is hydration. A couple of episodes back, we talked about hydration for both people and horses and the importance of it. Make sure you check out that episode. It's about leading a horse to water. But I'll just mention it briefly here again as we're talking about the winter blues, because as the temperature drops, it makes us want to drink less water, whether it's people or horses. And so this is a time of year that I try to pay particular attention to my horse's hydration. Sometimes a little bit more than even in the summer, because it's a lot easier to get a horse to drink when it's hotter outside, typically. But this is a time, as we've had an abrupt change in seasons, to remind yourself to stay well hydrated, because it's super easy to not drink as much when it gets cold outside. So a couple tips to help you drink more water. Remember that coffee or tea without a lot of additives in it, without a lot of sugar or flavorings, can help you get your hydration count in for the day. Tea and coffee without the additives is good for you, and so warm beverages may be the way to go if you're having trouble getting all your hydration in since the weather has turned cooler. Another tip to kind of along the same lines for horses is you may need to check and change their hydration system. They may need a heated bucket or an insulated bucket. If I have used the heated buckets, and they've been very safe for me. Of course, it is very much a concern of mine anytime you add electricity around water. But I've never had an issue with those buckets, and I've had other people use the insulators to go around the buckets, because what I have found that it does is it'll warm up that water a little bit. It's not lukewarm, but if you touch it, it's warmer than if you're just in a regular 5-gallon bucket. And while it's been my experience with horses haven't necessarily hit the heated buckets harder than the regular buckets, obviously they will when the regular buckets ice over. But particularly if you have a horse that is sensitive to fronts and temperature change, it may be soothing to them to have a water source that stays a little bit warmer and constantly is there, so they can seek that out and hopefully tend to go drink that little bit of warmer water, and not end up with the bellyache from the front coming through. So it was very surprising to watch my horses use those buckets, because I was like, oh, they're just going to go drink these all the time. And they didn't, but they came in handy at very crucial times, and even helped one of my horses that was very prone to colicking during fronts overcome that. We were able to get a system worked out, so that we had less colic bills, which is always a good thing. So make sure you're checking hydration systems for both you and your horse. And with the colder temperatures, and our horses always brings up the great blanket debate. Typically it comes up on social media about this time. I think everybody's been shocked so cold that it hasn't made its rounds yet this year. At least it hasn't through my social media feed. But to blanket or not to blanket your horse. Now, if you show horses and you are one of those people that keep your horses slick, you've had your horses under lights and worked real hard to keep them short-haired, then you have a blanketing system down, a barn system down to where they're staying warm, and that's great, because that is very much an art and a science within itself. But barns who do that always have a very good system to keep the horses warm and make sure they're not too warm, and keep everything moving forward. But if you're one of those people who don't do that, who don't have their horses in show shape or slick haired, and allow them to grow a coat, then I feel like there's some guidelines to take into consideration on whether to blanket or not. I know my family in the past, we've had years that we've blanketed a lot, depending upon what we're doing that winter, and years that we don't blanket anybody. When my family was really rodeoing hard and doing a lot of winter rodeos, the rope horses were blanketed, and not to keep them in show shape, but to shorten their hair a little bit, in the thought process that if they don't have as much hair, they'll cool off faster, in those buildings where it is very warm when you're roping, going ropings or rodeos. And so that seemed to work well for that set of rope horses. However, some basic blanketing guidelines should be followed no matter what your goal for blanketing is, whether it's keeping them slick, show shape, whether you're wanting their hair to be a little bit shorter so that they'll cool off faster. Just know this: horses tolerate cold a lot better than people do. Kind of the general consensus on blanketing guidelines is that horses should not be blanketed over about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, with a light to medium blanket, and that they really don't need a heavy blanket until 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So you've seen the cartoons and the memes about the super blanketed horse, and the other one's asking what's wrong with you, and the horse saying my owner is cold. That's a real thing. You can definitely see a correlation with owners' tolerance to how they blanket their horses sometimes. But it's important to note that nature created the horse's coat to withstand crazy temperatures, and putting a blanket on there can impede that process of allowing these horses' coats to fluff up to keep that warm air trapped next to their skin to keep them warm. That's one way they combat it. Another way they combat staying warm is moving. We know that horses are herd animals, and out in the wild they would often, be moving throughout the day, trying to get to unfrozen water and foraging. And so movement is another way that they keep warm. And the third way that they really keep warm is eating hay or grass or roughage. And so when it is super cold, when it is going to dip down, very cold in your area, those might be nights that you give them extra hay or allow them more free choice hay to keep them a little bit warmer. Because all three of those processes work hand in hand to support the horse in cold weather. We as humans get in the way of this, along with many other processes the horses go through. But keeping that in mind will help you avoid some of the pitfalls that can come with improper blanketing. If horses get too warm or they start sweating and that gets trapped underneath the blanket for hours on end, horses can get sick from that and get belly achy. They can also try to get their blanket off if they're super uncomfortable, which can lead to other hazards of horses getting caught up in their blankets being torn, different dangers that way. So really, if you read through everything, it's always blanketing is definitely a personal choice, and I do think you need to have your reasoning behind it in mind. But if you read through the guidelines and the suggestions from the experts, blanketing really gets in the way, with the exception of older horses that don't have as much weight on them, or horses who have been abused or rescued from a bad situation. Those are horses that could definitely benefit from blanketing. And I've even had horses that don't grow coats as well, that have come off the track or come out of places where they were kept shorter coats in the winter, and that next year when they're in my barn, they don't grow as much coat because they're not used to it. And so part of the year they do get blanketed to help them stay warm and combat the crazy weather that sometimes comes along with cold temperatures. So a couple things to just keep in mind as the temperature has plummeted and the daylight has shortened. Keep on top of how you're feeling and how your buddies are feeling with the shortened daylight and colder temperatures. Look out for symptoms of seasonal affective disorder. Make sure you and your horse are getting all the water that you need to be getting. That's not just a warm weather tip, it's a cold weather tip as well. And make sure you have goals in mind for why you blanket, and processes and systems in place to do that properly to help reach your goals and keep your horses comfortable and safe throughout this blustery season that we have entered into. So I hope talking about some of the winter issues will help you combat the winter blues. If not, we can still commiserate together about being cold, because this delicate Southern belle will always be one you can share that struggle with. And as always, this Southern belle will see you down the road. Thank you for listening to the Rider's Edge podcast today. We appreciate your time and attention. Thank you for always helping us move the conversation forward. If you liked today's podcast, please help us keep the conversations going by subscribing to this podcast and consider leaving us a review so others can find us and join in on the conversations. You can also find more information by checking us out on our social media channels, including Facebook at Writer's Edge Therapy and Wellness, Instagram at Writer's Edge Therapy, and our website, www.writersedgetherapy.com. It is there that you can book a consult for either you or your horse. Thank you, and as always, we will see you down the road.